Okay, guys, what's going on? Midwest Swing Podcast Network, Zone Coverage Podcast Network, Midwest Swing coming at you. Actually thinking about rebranding this show as a different name, so we'll see if Tom approves that. We'll see if it flies. Anyway, home now after the 10-3 Twins win on Friday night at Target Field. A little bit of fireworks on the field, a little bit of fireworks after the game. And it's going to be a fun game story to write tonight. I appreciate you all hanging out with me late on a Friday night / early Saturday morning, as people like me who would rather do this than be out at night, which is kind of funny. Steven Risotto, what's going on, man? Good to see you in the chat room. And so, yeah, we'll just hang for a little while here. I decided to bring the show home tonight so I could get home a little bit here, a little bit before it gets crazy downtown, because obviously the later at night it gets, the less friendly it gets to be walking around downtown out by the stadium. So I like to come home and get these things done, and I'll write my game story after this. But obviously a very, very fun night for fans at Target Field. Twins explode for 7 runs over the final 3 offensive innings and win 10-3 in comeback fashion. 10 unanswered runs for the Twins offense. Triple for Byron Buxton inside the park. Home run for Byron Buxton. A couple home runs from Miguel Sano. Eduardo Escobar getting in on the act. You got Eddie Rosario getting in on the act with, let's see, what did Rosario have? He had a couple doubles, so big strong night for him. So yeah, offensively, very good night for the Twins, who improved to 29-35 at home, 61-59 on the season. Beat a very good pitcher in Zach Godley, who had the curveball working, but was, he was being chased a little bit with hits. He had the strikeouts, 10 strikeouts in, 6 innings, 5 1/3. So 10 strikeouts in 5 1/3 innings, but also 9 hits allowed. So he was ducking for cover anytime he wasn't getting guys swinging and missing at that nasty curveball. And so, we obviously saw that the curveball was very dastardly from the young right-hander, and he looked great. The Twins aren't going to see him that much since they only play the National League West once every 3 seasons. But he looked every bit like the guy who has put together an ERA under 3.0 up until this point. I do see MN Twins fan 44 asking, Greinke tomorrow. Yes, it is Greinke versus Barrios. And I am definitely kicking myself for not covering that one. But we're going to Murray's to have some steak and then going out afterwards. So first real date night for the wife and I since we've had the baby, which will be pretty interesting. Alex Thunstrom, where do you think they need to be in the standings in order to make a move? Any names? Well, I see Wilhelm Davis posting on Twitter that he defeated my cat. Yeah, Buster's on the floor here insisting that he's hungry, but yeah. That's a good question, Alex, and I think the thing is, if the Twins can take 2 out of 3 from Arizona, they're going to have 5 games against the White Sox, a team that's already packed it in. One of the very few teams in the American League that is not playing for anything right now. If they can take 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5, heaven forbid, a sweep, man, you really could convince yourself that the Twins could add a pitcher, either a reliever or a starter. I am more bullish on this bullpen than I was a month ago. In the last month, they've been pretty good. They did have, they've had a couple letdowns here recently, but for the most part, it's been a pretty good bullpen over the last month or so. So I think you can definitely convince yourself that you can add one arm in the bullpen without any real issues. As far as a starter, I think there's some names. The problem is, and I see somebody suggesting Estrada in the chat. Estrada was on my list, and so was Feldman. Here's the issue. Feldman is on the disabled list and is probably not going to pitch much for the rest of the season with the Reds. He's really, really not looking healthy. I think it's his knee. And the trouble with Estrada is that he was claimed on waivers, and so if Toronto puts him on waivers again and a team claims him, he then goes to that team. So I don't think Toronto is going to put him back on waivers. And frankly, Toronto thinks they're still in the mix. And who can argue with them? I think, what did they do tonight? I'm looking at. They lost to the Cubs tonight, but right now Toronto is 59-63. So they're technically, 3 games behind the Twins in the standings. So you could still convince yourself that you're in it. It is kind of a hard sell. And it's for the same reason it's a hard sell that the Twins, in theory were in it 2 weeks ago, was not so much how many games you are out, but rather how many teams you have to leapfrog, which is, it's always going to be the issue with these sort of things. Is if you're going to have to make that uphill climb to make it back into relevance. Don Loken says he's got, or is it Loken or Loken? Don, you're going to have to tell me. He's got some family coming into town, so that should be very fun as well. It seems like teams aren't losing much so far in waiver trading period. Lots of players to be named later or cash. That's also evident tonight. Curtis Granderson being traded from the Mets to the Dodgers for the player to be named later or cash. Neil Walker being traded as well. So yeah, it's not a period right now where players are requiring a lot back. And I think too, another thing that the Twins can do is trade pieces that are going to be squeezed off, not squeezed off the 40-man roster, but there's going to be a crunch this offseason as far as guys that don't make the 40-man roster into next year that will be exposed onto the Rule 5 draft, whether you're talking about some of these AAA pitchers and that kind of deal. I'm trying to think of who the one I'm thinking of is. It's a Scott Boras client, I think, that is jetted between Ryan Eads. I think Ryan Eads is one of those guys, and a few other guys who may not make the 40-man roster or could get bumped off in the off season. So it'll be interesting to see if they make some moves with those guys as well. Nico Goodrum and all that. I think Dan just asked if I think the Twins can catch Cleveland or the Yankees. Well, let's pull up the trusty standings because I don't have them off the top of my head. Steve Ehrman wants to know if Colorado or Arizona fail to make the playoffs. I think it'll be Colorado and Arizona in the wild card game, to be honest with you. They're 4 games up on St. Louis and way up on Miami. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an all-West wild card in the what am I trying to say here? In the wild card game in the National League side. On the American League side, you have the Twins 61-59, the Yankees 65-56. So the Twins are 3.5 behind the Yankees and 6 behind the Indians. They're definitely not going to catch Cleveland. I just don't see any way that happens. But could they catch the Yankees? Yeah, I don't know. The Yankees are tough. They're a fun team, and honestly, I don't want any part of going into Yankee Stadium in terms of I don't want any part of going into Yankee Stadium, especially if they're going to be starting Severino, if they can line that up, which is that's a tough matchup. He's been, I think, like the 3rd best pitcher in the American League by Fangraphs WAR, which is pretty incredible. I did see Mike ask thoughts on Molitor being happy with Jimenez and Castro behind the plate. Honestly, I kind of get it, to be honest with you. Defensively, they've done a fine job, and I know Jimenez has obviously had that game a couple weeks ago, or a couple days ago, actually, in Detroit where he really struggled. But for the most part, they've done a decent enough job back there. And the other thing, too, is for a catcher to come up and catch a staff, it's a pretty significant undertaking, and they're going to dip his toes in there before they throw him in headlong. And you have to keep in mind, too, he's never hit like this before. And so to do it at AAA is, there's part of it that could be a fluke in that maybe he just had a really nice year, but there's part of it, too, that he could be, a bit of a late bloomer who is kind of coming around. But I know that a lot of the prospect guys are still not really buying his bat as far as a 900 OPS guy should be considered from this point, having done that in the International League. So I don't know. Defensively, he's come around to. I've heard a lot of good things about his defensive work behind the plate in terms of framing and footwork and how he's improved. And I talked to Chris Jimenez today about it. And in fact, I said to Jimenez, the elephant in the room is that Garver is the catcher of the future. And he says, dude, I totally get it. Whether that future is now, next year, whenever, it's Jason and my job to get him ready. And so they both are welcoming him with open arms. And Jimenez told me, too, that that was his plan with Lucroy last year. If Lucroy would have accepted the deal to Cleveland, Jimenez was just going to show him around, and he was going to be that guy. Jimenez, for a lot of things is, for what hasn't really done on the field this year. Again, he does do great things in that clubhouse, and it's impressive. I know that doesn't resonate with fans as much because he's hitting like 190 and had that tough defensive game, but he's a consummate professional and will do whatever it takes to help this team win. And I do think that that's why he's been on so many teams that have won. Again, he doesn't play a huge role in that winning, and he's aware of that. He's one of the most intelligent players I've ever spoken to, and it's unbelievable. We do our shows on YouTube, and I have so much fun. I have more fun talking baseball with him off the record than on the record. And if you've seen any of those shows, and I would encourage you to go back and look at them, we have a lot of fun on those shows. But off the record, he just gives me gold as far as what it's like to catch Cole Hamels or Corey Kluber, and how difficult those guys are to hit, and how catching them and hitting them is so different you wouldn't even believe it. And so I can see why the media people gravitate towards him, because he'll give you great quotes. It's unfiltered. He'll tell me exactly what he's thinking on any given day, and he's the consummate professional. He's going to get Mitch Garver ready. He started that process this spring, and he said what he's seen since this spring from Garver in terms of growth to now is incredible. So he's obviously keeping a close eye on Garver, and obviously is prioritizing his development over his own personal, his own personal exploits. And that's why, too, I think he's going to make a great manager or coach someday. And he told me that's exactly what he wants to do when he retires, whether that's tomorrow or 10 years from now. So it's really interesting. I saw Steve Irwin just asked, I think he said Byron Buxton, number 2 on the team in WAR. Will he get to number 1, or what the odds are? I think it's very good. I think that it's unbelievable what Buxton has been capable of this year in terms of in-season adjustments. And you just see what he did at the plate tonight. Try to imagine that 3 or 4 months ago with how lost he was. And even, those first 2 weeks were really bad, but he didn't really, in his estimation, he thought he really started showing emotion on the field in late July is when he really started feeling good. But if you look at the last month, he's got like a 780 or 800 OPS, crazy good defense. He's running the bases. He's stolen, I think, 16 straight bases without being caught. 21 of 22 on the season. That's insane value that, probably don't know how to quantify. And even people like me really don't know how you really sum up elite defense and base running for a guy who may or may not be that great of an offensive player at this point. But, again, and like I said in the offseason, if you get to a 700 OPS with Buxton, and if he's not there, he's knocking on it. He's probably about 670 right now. That's a very, very, very valuable player. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I did see somebody, too, ask if Tim Melville was signed out of Indie Ball this year, and I believe that is the case. I'm going to pull up his page because I think he might have been with the Long Island Ducks, but I'm going to double-check that. But I do know he was in Indie Ball. Yep, Long Island Ducks. He had a 3.45 ERA in 9 starts, 9.2 strikeouts per 9. I actually ran his numbers because I think there's a fair shot that he's going to start on Monday for the Twins. I don't want to be, blowing that up, but I think there's a fairly good chance because he was supposed to start this weekend for Rochester. He's not on their probables anymore, so I'm just kind of reading between the lines. I think Melville may start for the Twins on Monday. He has like a 1.86 ERA in his last 4 starts, 36-9 strikeout to walk ratio in 30. I think it was like 32 1/3 innings. Really coming on strong. And this is a guy who was a top 100 prospect in 2010, part of that Baby Royals bunch with Mike Moustakas, Eric Hosmer, John Lamb, Mike Montgomery, and so he was a really, really good pitcher for the Royal system before he had some arm issues and couldn't throw strikes. I did see someone ask how many days rest. I believe he was originally slated to start Saturday, so I probably put you around 5 or 6 days rest, which, it's not out of whack. It's not like Nick Tepesch when Tepesch went, it was like 14 days or 17 days between starts, which, don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting much, but yeah, I was just flabbergasted by that. Josh Meyer wants to know, what about an R.A. Dickey reunion? I am absolutely positive that R.A. Dickey would be a good move for the Twins. He is, I think he's got an option for next year that I don't know if he would exercise that option, but, he's having a classic R.A. Dickey season. Some walks, not as many strikeouts, and maybe an inflated whip. But when I think he's 42, maybe 43. He's doing what has made him fairly good since the Cy Young season with the Mets, and so I've been impressed with what he's done under the radar with the Braves. I don't know, the Braves seem to think they're better than they are, and I'm not trying to besmirch them, but when you look at how they proceeded over this off season and how they built, it looked more like a team that thought it was on the cusp of contending rather than, trying to continue the churn during the rebuild. And again, they're getting close. You got Freddie Freeman, who's a great player. Ozzie Albies is pretty good as well. It's interesting to see. Yeah, Grant Spears, $8 million team option is going to be interesting. You could, in theory, exercise that. Also, how amazing would it be to have R.A. Dickey and Bartolo Colon in the same rotation? Again, I know the Braves did this year, which is like 85 or 88 years of collective human, which would be amazing to have in your rotation. Again, you wouldn't want to have it that way probably going into next year, but I would be on board with a Dickey reunion, and you'd have to think long and hard. Sorry, bad phrasing there. About if you'd have to think long and hard about exercising Dickey. That's terrible phrasing, and I feel bad for that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if Dickey could succeed here, which would be a nice pickup, because you're not getting a guy like Dickey for $8 million on the free agent market this off season. So I don't know. I'd be interested, but there's a lot of other guys I think I'd be interested in as well. Looking forward. So I don't know. I think if they go out and get a starter, Dickey's got to be on that list. Like I wrote his own coverage earlier this past week, because just due to age and salary, he's got a better chance to get to the Twins on waivers than some of the younger, cheaper, better pitchers. Tyler Chatwood might be an option, ground ball guy who pitches really well outside of Coors. Again, Target Field's played smaller this year than most years, but Coors, that's a tough place. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting names. I think Melville could be interesting too. I still have hope for Nick Turley as probably more of a reliever, and I know people are going to laugh at that. But Gonsalves is close. Sligers deserves a longer look. It's going to be a lot of fun to see. Alex Thunstrom says Rosario was thought to not be in the long-term plans before. Got to believe that's changed. Actually, Steve Adams, who writes for MLB Trade Rumors, had noted that on the Scoop podcast, very good podcast with Doogie Wolfson, you should be listening to it, and I should be too, but I haven't had time, that the Twins fielded a lot of calls around the deadline about Rosario and said, nope, he's part of the future. We're really not interested in moving him. And again, I have to believe, as much as teams might be sniffing around him, knowing what I've dug up about how, his value as far as potential, they probably know he need pitching, and we're probably offering some kind of, number 3 fringy starter for Rosario, and the Twins just, we're wise not to bite on that, because obviously Rosario's played his best ball since the deadline especially. So, I don't know. I did see Daniel Fox ask, will the Twins sign an ace in the offseason? I don't know about ace. There will be some interesting arms available in terms of guys like Lance Lynn. I don't have to bring up the list, because it's Yu Darvish I'd be probably interested in. I'm trying to think of who else I would be interested in. Let's just go down the list. I think Lance Lynn is interesting. I see Alex Cobb mentioned on the screen, which, yeah, I would be tepidly interested in Alex Cobb. Jake Arrieta, I really don't know if I'd go after. Trevor Cahill is pretty interesting, especially if you put a good defense behind him. Ulysse Chassin is really interesting, especially cheaply. Steve wants to know why only probably interested in you. Just the price on Darvish. If he's going to sign a $200 million deal, that's a lot of money. No, Mike, I'm not saying Lynn is an ace. I just think that Lynn is a very good pitcher and might sign for, a Rick Porcello deal or something less than that. So I think that's interesting. I think Tyler Chatwood is interesting. Get Chatwood outside of Coors and let's play. 55% ground ball rate. He's got some strikeouts, not a ton. But again, I think his ERA splits are like 6 at Coors and like 3.5 at Road. Again, it's not apples to apples comparison, but who knows? Maybe you put him in an easier park and things are a little better for him. Wee and Chen can opt out. I wouldn't want anything to do with that. Johnny Cueto, I don't know if I'd really be interested in Cueto there. Daniel asking if the Twins would send Barrios down if he gets blown up again tomorrow. No, I don't think that's going to happen. If Dickey was a free agent, could the Twins be interested in him? Estrada would be an interesting arm to look at, but he's 34 going into the offseason. Scott Feldman will be 35. Jaime Garcia, 31. Let's see. Jeremy Hellickson, I don't think I'd want to go down that road. Yeah, Lance Lynn at 31 I'd be interested in. Francisco Liriano is a bounce back. If he's really cheap, and I know people are going to, bristle at that idea, but I might give him a look. Ricky Nolas, I'm just kidding. Clayton Richard is interesting. Tyson Ross is interesting. Maro Tanaka, of course, opting out would be super interesting, but I just don't see that happening. And that's about it. So I don't know. Yeah, Max Law, who I saw at Target Field tonight, which was cool, and both he and Joe are saying, how about the bullpen for Liriano? Yeah, I floated that idea on Twitter a couple weeks ago. It was not that popular, but if Liriano works out of the pen, and I don't think it's gone very well for him out of the pen in Houston, but he does have the skill set in short bursts where you could see a guy who could eventually be closing with some pretty nasty stuff. So we'll see what happens. Dan Fox wants to know over on ejections with Hernandez behind the plate. I'll take the under just because I think they're going to be well behaved with all the stuff going on with Michael Kadire tomorrow. So knock on wood, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I see your point, Mike, about those guys all being number 3s or worse. I don't know. I just think that I think that you just have to be realistic. John Neese on the list too, a bounce back guy. Mike Minor's a bounce back guy. Matt Moore, I think his club option will get exercised, but you have to get creative. You have to hope that one of your lottery tickets pans out, whether it's Turley, Melville. Sleegers is kind of a lottery ticket in that I don't think a ton was expected out of him, but if he becomes Chris Young with some ground balls, that's a pretty nice deal for you as well. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I'm really intrigued to see what these guys do in an off season. Yeah, Fernando Romero is obviously in the mix too. Mike is mentioning on the chat room here. I saw Alex ask if he signed 1 or 2 starters. I think it's only 1. I don't think you can sign 2. I don't know what you do with. Some people ask him about Gibson. I would probably move Gibson to the bullpen and bring up Sleegers, and maybe even before the end of the month, before September. I think they're going to give Gibson one more start, and in Chicago, and then from there, it might just be Sleeger's spot. Put Gibson in the bullpen and say, look, dude, you've got the rest of the year to prove that you deserve to be around, or we're going to non-tender you. And the trouble is, if you look at Kyle Gibson, you can see a skill set that could succeed someplace. I'm just afraid it's not going to be here, and it might not be as a starter. And I don't know if he can do it as a reliever either. But there's just too much Mike Pelfrey in him right now, and that's not good. It's not enough strikeouts. It's a lot of ground balls. It's too many walks. Just doesn't work in the environment that he's in. Yeah, Joe says in San Francisco he'd probably thrive. I tend to agree. I don't know why I feel like San Francisco would be a place he would survive. Brandon Crawford is really good at shortstop. They traditionally have good defense in the infield. Brandon Bell can really pick it. And I don't know. It's a bigger park. It's just a good environment to pitch in. You see guys like Matt Cain of years before, Madison Bumgarner. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. But I still think he could make it out of the bullpen as a sinker slider guy. Just simplify. So, I don't know. Guys, I'm going to wrap it up because I got to make sure that this still posts to YouTube tonight. So, check out everything on zonecoverage.com. I had my pregame blog earlier tonight. Going to have a game story here for you in about an hour. Then I'm going to go to bed, and then tomorrow I get to go to Murray's, and you guys get to deal with Barrios against... Who was it again? Why can't I remember? Barrios against Greinke. So it's going to be a fun night for you guys. I'll try to catch some highlights. Maybe we'll periscope after I have a few drinks. I'm just kidding. I better not because I don't want to get in trouble with the big man Schreier. So if it rains tomorrow, it is Schreier's fault. Peace.